Yo, dude. Oh my god, my dude. My dude.
My pal, my guy, move your supple ass, my dude!
Wikibeania, just the tips, gave me the shaft. If you reach around my back now, I'll reach around yours later.
Before we get started, I just wanted to shout out a new member of the channel, Sasuke11457. If you would like to directly support the nonsense I produce on this channel while getting named in the videos and early access to releases, please do consider becoming a member. Or if you just want to get a name drop on the next video, like Schnupfendrash and Gledster, just follow the instructions on the following wall of text. In this long old journey to revisit and rank every Far Cry game in the series except these ones, we finally find ourselves at a game that I had never played before, not even a little bit. Here's the current ranking just for anyone who hasn't been paying attention or following along as we go. As I mentioned in the Far Cry 5 video, I ended my initial playthrough of that game when God of War 2018 came out, and I never went back to the series after that. Until now, obviously. I was, shall we say, cautiously optimistic about finally playing New Dawn, and for a few reasons. I was optimistic about it being the first Far Cry to be a direct sequel, and the general opinion of the game seems to have swung massively from everyone hating it to having quite a few defenders online championing the unique aspects of this game. Notice I did say cautiously optimistic, because that magenta colour scheme and general aesthetic was giving me Rage 2 vibes, another game I made a video about, which you should go and watch after you finish watching this one, and while I enjoyed that game, I did find the general tone of it to be a little bit grating. One of the unexpected challenges with putting this ranking list together is that I'd forgotten just how different each of the Far Cry games are from one another. Obviously the first game is completely different because it was made by different people, and I would argue is better classified as a crisis game, which might be another list I do in the future. I had assumed that after Far Cry 3, these games would all be basically the same, but in different settings. But I'm happy to say I've been surprised as to just how many unique aspects each entry has had following that release. With Far Cry 4, in my opinion, being the only game so far to very closely resemble Far Cry 3. Continuing the trend with these more recent games, I found it tricky to get any kind of behind the scenes information about the development for this game. However, I can at least cobble together some bits and pieces based on what I did manage to find about the previous games in the series. In 2015, prior to the release of Far Cry Primal, Ubisoft sent out a poll to select players, asking them to vote on various settings for future games in the series, which included a few options which we have already seen become actual Far Cry games, to some extent. The Far Cry 5 DLCs, which I haven't and probably will never play, covering the futuristic sci-fi setting along with the Vietnam War and zombie outbreak options. And while it didn't include dinosaurs, Far Cry Primal did come pretty close. There's also an option there for a quote Mad Max style post-apocalyptic world, which ties in nicely with a quote from Dan Hay in a Far Cry 5 documentary where he mentions a post-apocalyptic setting as something the team had wanted to do for a while. In a different making of documentary for Far Cry 5, it was mentioned that the nuclear Armageddon ending for that game was supposed to come at the end of Act 2, with the final act of that game taking part in the Ashes of Hope County. While unconfirmed, this was most likely scrapped due to time constraints, so instead the idea was clearly moulded into a standalone and slightly cheaper release. I say slightly cheaper, it's currently on Steam for 38 quid compared to Far Cry 5 or 6's £50. Personally, I would not recommend paying £38 for this game. All the Far Cry games seem to go on sale fairly frequently these days, so I would wait until the next big sale and it'll probably come down to a much more reasonable price. It's also worth noting that Ubisoft Toronto seemed to have been completely absent for the development of this one, and Ubisoft Bucharest being brought in as a support studio for the first time since Far Cry 3, alongside series veterans Shanghai and Kyiv, with Ubisoft Montreal once again being the lead studio. Who worked on what? We don't know, and fuck you for asking. I know not everybody cares about this sort of thing, but I at least find it interesting. There's quite a few drastic changes in this game, and I'd have liked to have found out some sort of reasoning behind their inclusion. That said, I think I do know the reason for some of these changes, and without giving anything away, I think a lot of the changes have to do with something that rhymes with microtransactions. So with nothing else about the development to go on other than some crazy accusations, let's get into the game itself. Spoiler warning for pretty much the rest of the video here for anyone who hasn't played the game yet, but honestly I don't think there's really anything to spoil here, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. I mean, this isn't 1899's Heart of Darkness or anything like that. The game opens with a cutscene filling us in on what's happened in Hope County since the bombs fell. Told through us through Carmina Rye, daughter of Nick and Kim Rye from Far Cry 5, as she sums up the backstory since the bombs fell and setting up where we join in. Turns out that quite a few people actually survived Armageddon, and several of them have built a settlement together in Hope County, and for a time it was good. Then a group of violent motocross enthusiasts who call themselves the Highwaymen turned up, led by twin sisters Lou and Mickey. Seriously though, what is it with this particular style of post-apocalypse where the bad guys seemingly find warehouses full of motorcycle armor and spikes to add to it? How often do you see spikes ready to apply to shoulder pads in your day-to-day life? That line of thinking also reminds me of those 1%er biker gangs who spend their time intimidating people, running drugs and guns and being all violent and aggressive and such, but then they have to go home, get out their needle and thread and get stuck into some embroidery. Same with metalheads and those denim battle jacket things. They spend all night drinking heavily and singing songs about mutilation and religious persecution, and then go home, sit next to the fire with a cup of tea and make sure the needlework is up to standard on their dying fetus patch that just really brings the whole jacket together. As a disclaimer, you can't get mad at me, I say this as a motorcyclist and a metalhead, though I can't stitch to save my life, so deep down I'm just jealous of their finger dexterity. Jesus, I think that's a record for the inane rambling to start on one of these things. Though it is slightly related because I do have trouble taking the bad guys seriously in this game, and their choice of attire and colour scheme contributes to that. Anyway, where were we? Oh yes, so the Highwaymen have come to Hope County wanting it for themselves, and Carmina has been sent to find a chap called Thomas Rush and his captain, who have been travelling around the devastated west coast on their party train helping people rebuild their little bits of society. And this train just happens to be heading straight towards Hope County, which is frightfully convenient. I'm a bit hazy on the details, so I'm not sure if these chaps were heading to Hope County anyway, or if Carmina found them and asked them to come and help. Either way, the train crashes, which I assume was caused by the Highwaymen, which leaves me questioning how they knew that train was coming. Although, now that I think about it, is a speeding train really the most sensible way to move across a country that is being blasted by nuclear bombs? Is there not the slightest chance that the rails might be a tad warped here and there? In the UK in autumn, we sometimes have trains delayed due to excessive leaves on the track, but nearly 20 years of nuclear dust and lack of maintenance is safe enough to barrel along at full speed? Regardless of the reasons, the train crashes and we climb out of the wreckage to learn that we will be addressed as Captain or Cap for the rest of the game, because we once again have a customizable character just like Far Cry 5, so we don't talk again because that would require 2 voice actors, and apparently Ubisoft just doesn't have the budget for that sort of thing. Go back and watch the Far Cry 5 video for my full opinion on silent protagonists, but in short I think it's an outdated style. However, at least the player character silence isn't as painful here as it was in the last game. Once we are in control of our character, we get the now familiar Far Cry introduction sequence, though the 2 key steps are in reverse order here. Usually we meet the main protagonist and are shown why they are to be feared before having to run away in a hail of bullets. This time, however, we get chased by baddies through a hail of bullets and then come face to face with the intimidating antagonist, or antagonists in this case. This is going to sound like a random tangent, yes I know another one, but do go with me on this because I promise it's related. I remember when The Force Awakens came out that I didn't really like Kylo Ren as a bad guy, or the ginger chap whose name I forget now. It took me a while to figure out why I didn't buy them as intimidating bad guys, and it was only after watching the older films again that I think I figured it out. When Kylo Ren and Ginger McMahon get angry, they stomp their feet and shout a lot and generally have a bit of a sulk. These characters aren't intimidating to me because they don't come across as someone who is in control. Instead, they seem like stroppy little twats that have a bit of a paddy when people don't do what they want. During a scene towards the end of the game, I was reminded of another film called The Devil's Rejects. Now, I haven't seen that film in a long time because I found it to be incredibly tedious and not nearly as good or as funny, apparently, as my mate told me it would be. But in that film, a family of mass murderers, among other things that I don't think I can mention on YouTube, get taken hostage themselves and have similar punishments done to them as they have done to victims in the past. And it feels like the film is trying to make us feel sorry for these groups of horrible bastards that frankly don't deserve any empathy or sympathy. Which brings me back to the twins, Mickey and Lou. If you haven't already guessed, I'm not a big fan of these two or their gang. I think most of it is down to the aesthetic style of the game informing the tone of the characters, something I also had an issue with in Rage 2, which, another plug, you can hear all about here in my Rage 2 video. Please like and subscribe and hit that bell, etc, etc. Something about wearing motocross gear and being keen on vibrant pink seems to go hand in hand with overt violence and an I don't give a fuck attitude, and I'm really not a fan of it. It's a style which was clearly quite popular for a short while but seems to be dying down again now, thankfully. I do feel like the twins were supposed to have more character development during the course of this game, but maybe it was cut for time or costs or whatever. They keep referencing lessons that their dad taught them, yet we never see their dad and we don't know anything about him. We get a flashback right at the end of the game that shows that their dad has basically indoctrinated the twins to the point where they don't seem to care about their mom anymore, but this felt to me more like a last minute attempt to try and make me feel sympathetic towards these two. The problem is that this comes after 13 or so hours of me fighting against this pair of dickheads who have led an invasion into an area for seemingly no reason other than they just want to. What, I'm supposed to suddenly care because they have parental issues? Bollocks to them, who cares? I certainly didn't. Anyway, these two corner our bad selves and Mr. Rush at the edge of a cliff, where they basically imply that you either become their slave or you get killed. Mr. Rush decides that he doesn't like either of those options for us, his loyal captain, so instead pushes us off the cliff. I'm not sure why he thought that was a sensible idea, but luckily for him it works, and also luckily Carmina just happens to have witnessed the whole thing and got down to the bottom of the cliff to drag us out of the water to safety. It's nice when things just work out like that, isn't it? Carmina leads us into Hope County, but along the way we learn about a major new mechanic for this game, that being crafting. It does feel wrong to call the map of this game a wasteland because there's actually quite a lot of life all over the place. The fallout from the blasts has seemingly not slowed down any of the local plants, though it has made them all a vibrant magenta colour for some reason, and the water looks more like a blue WKD than it does fresh drinking water. I personally prefer this sort of aesthetic to having another very brown and barren world to explore, but I did feel like the graphics were not quite as impressive as Far Cry 5. Everything just felt a little too saturated for my liking. But then that might have just been the contrast between the vibrant and more dull colours being used. I can't really tell, I'm not that clever. Anyway, calling this a wasteland would suggest that there is a lot of waste lying around, which just isn't true because it seems that humanity in this world is very keen on recycling, to the point where there will be literal crates of bits and bobs lying around buildings for you to collect and use to craft yourself some weaponry. We get started by crafting a saw blade launcher, which I took to mean we would eventually be able to build a wide variety of makeshift weapons incorporating all sorts of different items to put together a truly unique arsenal unlike anything seen in any other Far Cry game. But no, it turns out it's just this one, which is actually one less weird gun than Far Cry 5. Maybe there's a secret weapon somewhere that fires plant pots out of a boot or something, but after this it's just a typical range of the usual weapons, but made out of hose pipes and sellotape and such. We get taught how to craft weapons and also go through a small combat encounter, during which I was struck by just how gruesome the takedown animations are in this game. I forgot to mention it in the Far Cry 5 video, but I was a bit disappointed by the takedown animations in that game because they're just a bit boring. But here you jam a pair of scissors into eye sockets, tear out people's biceps and jam that shiv into the back of their skulls, and sometimes you even give their neck a quick twist just for giggles. It made me realise that Far Cry 5 didn't once make me wince at any of the animations, so it was nice to feel a little bit of disgust again, even though it did seem a bit over the top. And with the continuing lack of healing animations for some weird reason, this is as much wincing as you'll get from this game. So Carmina leads us to her settlement called Prosperity to meet her mother, who tells us that seeing as Russia's being captured, it's all up to us, and only us, to save their village or fort or whatever they call this. This involves recruiting specialists who are scattered around the map and upgrading the various departments of Prosperity, which requires you to collect ethanol, which I will get into properly later on. During this time, you locate and rescue Rush, which pisses off the twins, who then turn up at your doorstep, threaten some kids, and launch an attack on Prosperity. After repelling this attack, but knowing you won't survive another assault, you are sent up north to make contact with New Eden, the remnants of Joseph Seed's cult. Apparently Mr. Rush witnessed a couple of New Eden guys attack a highwayman camp while he was being held captive. And after seeing two of them so off their tits on drugs that they got shot several times and still managed to run away, he thinks it's now a good idea to start distributing those drugs among everybody else and sends us off to make contact. I did notice that his story doesn't mention them killing anyone, just that they got shot a lot and managed to survive. So we head north to their camp and get turned away, only to be greeted by visions of Joseph Seed pointing us back to Tutorial Island from the last game. This is the first of a series of drug vision missions, which, as I mentioned in the last video, personally I'm pretty sick of. Somewhere along the way, someone decided that Far Cry games need hallucinations or drug trips, and while they've never been my cup of tea while being consistent in their narrative questionability, they've at least always been relatively short. There are a couple of these missions throughout the game that in total make up maybe about an hour of gameplay, and it just brings up more questions about how this is actually happening in universe. Clearly Tutorial Island is surrounded by what I assume to be bliss. Sure, we can see that. So how is it contained there? How is this airborne drug kept on one island? The next section shows us that the entire northern chunk of Hope County is smothered in bliss. Or at least I assume it's meant to be bliss, but I don't think anyone ever calls it that. But you can reverse the effects of the drug by lighting fire beacons? This bit reminded me of those forced insta-fail stealth sections in games like Spider-Man. There must have been so much time and effort devoted into producing this, and no one questioned whether it was any fun or not, or if it adds anything to anything. I suspect this section was added just to pad the runtime, and this isn't the only thing in the game added to make the whole thing feel a bit bigger than it really is. We pass a few trials to be allowed entry into the New Eden camp, where we meet their leader Ethan, who we soon discover has a face with the emotional range of a peeled potato. Ethan is Joseph Seed's son, who is now running the cult in Joseph's absence. Problem is that the followers of the cult are still pretty keen on Joseph and his teaching, so he sends us north to bring back evidence of his father's death. We head north and we find Joey, who has turned into a hermit and has drugged the whole land around him to stop people coming to see him, except for us apparently, because, guess what, we are the chosen one, for the second time in one game. We are extra chosen, apparently, saviour to all. He feeds us a magic apple which shunts us into a drug vision boss fight with a bear, so I don't know if the bear even existed, or if the bear was on drugs. Did it disappear like that because we're on drugs, or were we just having a seizure on the floor and all this is happening in our head? What actually happened here? I don't know, but we take Joseph back to the New Eden camp to help lead the cult against the highwaymen, much to Ethan's dismay. Oh, and we get superpowers now, like being harder to detect, able to take and deal more damage, and the ability to double jump. Video games. With New Eden on our side, we have to upgrade Prosperity again, and then we find out that Rush is being captured again, because apparently he's related to Princess Peach or some shit and just cannot stop getting captured. We go to rescue him, and extra spoilers for the only bit which I think could be considered a spoiler, Rush gets killed. Now, I didn't care that Rush died because he's been pretty useless throughout this game, but what annoyed me here is the stupidity surrounding his death. The twins have Rush held in a room we are told to come to by the twins in order to save Rush. The twins then instruct us to leave our weapons outside, a request which we fucking oblige for some stupid reason, and walk in there unarmed, with these two twats who hardly come across as honourable or remotely trustworthy. Remember in Die Hard when McClane duct tapes a gun to his back? We have picked up so many rolls of duct tape throughout this game. You mean to tell me I couldn't just stick a gun on my back or something and trick these two? Hell, just gear up and boot the door down, surprise these bastards. It gets worse when, once we've entered the room with two people who have proven they have no issue killing on a whim, we then put ourselves in handcuffs when asked. Ugh. Rush is then predictably killed, and we use our new superpowers to Hulk out and break out of our handcuffs and then start beating one of the twins to death, only for the other one to interrupt and shoot us out of the window. We regain consciousness with one of them kicking us on the floor before they both walk away, which left me confused as to why they didn't give me the old double tap just for good measure. But then I realised that this isn't the end of the game yet, and I'm the protagonist, so none of us can die right now. We then earn the trust of someone who can get us close to the twins to finally kill them, which involves winning a car combat match to earn a seat at the table of a celebratory dinner with the two of them. Which sounds a lot more complicated than just ambushing them in the small room that they invited us to moments ago, but whatever. This plan doesn't work though, and they quickly scurry off to attack the New Eden compound, which we run off to for our final showdown. Feels a bit daft to me to have the final showdown with these two here at the New Eden camp. Why not have it in the burning remains of Prosperity, the fort we've been upgrading and becoming accustomed to throughout the entire game? Why not have this duel surrounded by the fallen corpses of the families and friends we've been fighting to protect this whole time? Why did the twins get cocky and throw smoke bombs instead of just gunning us down there and then? Oh right, because then we couldn't have a boss fight. After some bullshit, which I will definitely be coming back to later, we kill the twins after the game attempts to make us give a toss about them, and then learn that Ethan, the other stroppy little shit, has gone to kill his father Joseph for no real reason other than he's a stroppy little shit. We find Ethan eating the same magic apple that gave us our powers, and then chase him into a boss fight where he turns into the giant Joker from the end of Batman Asylum, kicking off a battle that I really don't feel fits the control scheme of this game. Joseph has a bit of a cry, and we are seemingly given the option of either killing Joseph or letting him live, but I was still pissed off I couldn't kill him in the last game, so I barely hesitated when given the opportunity here. We go back to Prosperity, where people have built a little memorial for Rush, despite him being useless and having done nothing, and the game fades to black over a sunset. Or a sunrise, I'm not sure, I wasn't paying attention to my compass. I went into this game with no preconceived biases. I haven't played a bad Far Cry game yet, and while I remember this game getting panned online on its release, the apparent change of opinion made me think that initial negativity was just those weirdos who get offended by pink things and black women. But I have to say that I can't remember the last time I completed a game and felt this pissed off by the experience. The story, in my humble and often disturbing opinion, is awful. You are literally the saviour of two separate groups of people. The chosen one they have been waiting for as the only living being who can help them. The bad guys have no motivation other than being bad. Obvious and sensible courses of action on the part of both the goodies and the baddies are not taken several times for no reason other than the game isn't ready to end yet. Which is ironic because this game takes padding and grinding to a whole new level that I was not at all ready for or expecting. I was disappointed to be left with this impression because I think the game does do some things really well and has some other ideas that I really liked, but they didn't quite pull them off well enough for me. I'm going to attempt an unconventional approach and start with an example of frustration I encountered at the end of my time with New Dawn and work my way backwards in an attempt to properly demonstrate what, in my opinion, is a deeply flawed core set of systems for this game. Our journey begins at my first attempt at the boss fight with twins, where I get my ass firmly handed to me on a bullet-riddled platter because my level 3 weapons weren't strong enough to do anything but tickle the twins, one of which is wearing a hoodie and tracksuit bottoms just for reference. You see, the twins are prestige level enemies, so I need prestige level weapons, which I don't have access to yet because I haven't upgraded the weapons bench at prosperity enough. That requires ethanol, which can only be obtained by conquering outposts. But the outposts were easy because they were all full of level 1 enemies and only had 1 alarm post each, so I've already done all of these. Well, you can scrap your outposts and let the highwaymen take them back with level 2 enemies, letting you conquer it again for more ethanol. Side note, one of my issues with Far Cry 5 was that the outposts didn't get any more challenging due to the player being able to tackle them in any order they want. With New Dawn having us start at the very bottom of the map, I had hoped that the outposts would get harder the further north we went. But no, they are all as easy as each other until you go and click the menu option to make them harder, which you will have to do because there is no other way to earn ethanol. I mean, you can hijack trucks that potter around the map at random, but good luck doing that dependably. This also means that players who want a more challenging experience, like multiple alarm posts with a higher number of more varied enemies, need to grind through easier versions of these encounters before getting to the level of challenge they are looking for. That's just bad design, surely. Let's say you repeated a few outposts and got enough ethanol to upgrade your base to give you access to the prestige level weapons, guns good enough to take on the twins. Well, I just hope you've got enough crafting materials to put that new machine gun together, boyo. Now, to be fair, this was the first and only time in the game where I didn't have enough crafting materials for the weapon I wanted. Materials are everywhere, and the map even shows you which materials are in which spots. Though to be fair, I never found I needed that because I was collecting stuff as I went along, so I always had plenty. However, the prestige weapons I wanted needed circuit boards, something I didn't have enough of and are not found on the map. I did see that you can get 10 of these for killing a legendary bison, but I needed more than that. Enter the expeditions, another new feature for this game and something I felt had a lot of promise. After buying the appropriate base upgrade, you get access to a chap with a helicopter who will take you out of Hope County onto missions to retrieve a package which contains a whole heap of high-level crafting materials, one of which being circuit boards. I gave this a go as soon as I unlocked them, with me being tasked to infiltrate an aircraft carrier which has been beached and abandoned but was now being used as a highwayman base. It was my job to get in, find and collect the package and then make my way out to an as yet undisclosed pickup point. I actually really liked this, and not knowing where the extraction point would be allows for the opportunity to get creative and plan your escape route on the fly. So you can maybe imagine my immense disappointment, the winds being dragged screaming out of my sails of enthusiasm when I discovered that expeditions is misspelled, because the S on the end of that word suggests multiple expeditions, when in fact it is only one. It's the same map, but you get leveled up enemies. Yes, the drop-off point and extraction points change, but the map is the same. By the third time through, I was able to reliably find a spot where enemies can't get to you, so I could just sit there and wait for the helicopter to turn up before sprinting over there and escaping, hassle-free. I feel like this is such a wasted opportunity for this concept, and I really do hope this sort of thing gets built on somehow in the next game, or if not that, please be working on it for Far Cry 7. At this point, everything is starting to feel like an online looter shooter. I didn't have good enough gear to beat a boss, so I've had to replay several instances at different levels in order to save up enough resources to access better gear. I feel like this is as far on the opposite end of some sort of scale to Far Cry 2 as it possibly could be, but then I haven't played 6 yet and now I'm slightly worried about doing so. New Dawn is the first game in the series to give enemies health bars and show damage numbers when you shoot them, something I don't think you need together at the same time. Like, you can see a health bar decreasing, so what use are the numbers? And at this point is when we need to talk about the weaponry on offer here. So let's talk about the guns. Roll the montage. In terms of number of different guns, I feel confident in saying that Far Cry New Dawn has the most on offer in the series up to this point. The thing is that this comes at the expense of being able to customize weaponry like we've been able to since Far Cry 3. Let's just look at these weapons for a second. Here is a sniper rifle where the scope is adjusted with a valve. Here is a silencer that's just a bottle on the end of a barrel. These guns are held together with varying amounts of tape. Why, in the name of all that is holy, is this the game where we can't customize our weapons? Why is the game where one of the key collectible materials is literally duct tape the one where I cannot add parts to my gun? Oh, of course, that's right. It's because they need to gatekeep your abilities in order to force you into this incredibly restrictive crafting system which has been put in place in an attempt to encourage a fraction of the player base to buy packs of crafting materials. That's why there's numbers that erupt from enemies when you shoot them. It's a psychological trick to push you into striving for better weaponry, to make the numbers go up, and having enemy levels and gun levels reinforces that notion that you need higher level weapons, and if you don't want to put the effort into finding rare crafting materials, well, here's an easy to access store which can remove that effort for you. Now I know the comments that I'm going to get for this. It's usually stuff along the line of, well, I never spent any money and I completed the game just fine. And yeah, me too. In fact, most people did. But the thing I don't like about it is that they deliberately make the game worse in order to encourage players to spend extra money. It's like Disney Plus adding adverts and telling you to pay more to get rid of them. That's bullshit, right? We can agree on that. Well, New Dawn added a repeatable mission and told you to either play it several times or give them money. This is the element of modern game design that I personally hate the most, and weirdos on the internet keep defending it for some reason. I don't mind the guns having levels, as I naively thought they would work with the crafting system to improve as the game progresses. The first couple of guns I got took longer to reload, which I put down to their rusty appearance, thinking that as we progressed we'd get newer guns that work better and kill quicker. The problem is that they added enemy levels too, and as a handy poster in Prosperity clearly shows, lower level weapons are shit against higher level enemies. At least the higher level enemies here wear more armor and stuff, so this makes some sort of in-universe sense, which is more than can be said about the animals that can take more than 9 shotgun rounds to the face without so much as flinching. I could go on for hours about this sort of nonsense, and if you combine my rants in the Origins, Odyssey and Valhalla videos with this one, then it probably will be a pretty long rant by now, but this is just another example of a promising system that falls far too short due to corporate bullshit decisions. Luckily, the shooting is just as enjoyable as the other Far Cry games, and when you have the appropriate level weapon, of course. Weirdly, going back to the whole handcrafted aesthetic, I only encountered one novelty weapon in this game, which is exactly half the amount I found in Far Cry 5. The first weapon you craft is the saw blade launcher, like we said, and this can ricochet blades off surfaces. I didn't find much use for it though, as it's slow to reload, and I personally find it easier to just point my gun at the person I want to kill rather than pointing next to said person and hoping the blade bounces in the right direction. Much like many of my saw blades, there seems to have been a missed opportunity to include more handcrafted and unique weaponry here. While I've not played Far Cry 6 at all yet, I do seem to remember seeing lots of this sort of thing in the trailers, which does have me worried that maybe it's gone a bit too far the other way, but we'll have to wait for the next video to find out about that, I guess. One thing I did notice, which may not reflect everyone's experience with this game, was an apparent switch in the frequency of random chaos and animal attacks. I've said before that in my opinion the factor that makes a Far Cry game is the series of independent systems that regularly overlap to create unique scenarios for each player that would be almost impossible to exactly recreate. This seems to happen less frequently here for me, despite there being just as many opportunities for this as the last game. As such, I have far less examples of random chaos to regale you with. Or rather, I do have a few such stories, but the vast, overwhelming majority of them include random animal attacks. I mean, seriously, did someone cover our character in attractive but also enraging pheromones or something? Seemingly, the nuclear apocalypse did nothing but help the population of bears, because they are pouring out of the woods and into my face every few minutes. And they're seemingly all level 3, which turns these encounters into a lengthy ammo tax in the early game. Even the radioactively blue turkeys seem pissed off at me. In previous games, the animals were an essential part of improving your inventory space and weapon slots. But with that system completely changed, animals seem to exist solely to add a bit of life to the world and to jump at you from hedges every so often. I wouldn't mind so much if this cougar didn't take round after round to the face without so much as blinking, just like your mom. But Jesus Christ, why aren't humanity banding together to eliminate the animal menace once and for all? The Australians did it that once. Unfortunately, there is more to add to the pile of good ideas that I don't think got fleshed out enough for this game. First and foremost being the supply drops. Now I love the concept of these and I got excited about it when it first happened. You will hear a plane flying far overhead, usually just after receiving a notification that a supply drop is incoming. The plane drops a crate which is full of crafting materials and it's a race between you and any highwayman in the area to get there first. The thing is, these things always drop right next to you. The plane always flies directly over your head and will drop the crate within about 100 meters of your current position. We're told that the highwaymen have chapters all across the country and that they drop supplies in other areas to help each other out. This seems incredibly organised for a gang of overly violent knobheads, though maybe that does explain why they drop them over the head of the main person defending the area, rather than over one of their established outposts, maybe? I hardly ever had to fight anyone for these supplies because they fell so close to me, and one of the few times I did happen to get into a bit of a scuffle was because I just happened to be next to a group of baddies when the crate dropped. Wouldn't it have been better to see the drop happening way off in the distance and you need to make a snap decision about whether you could possibly make it there or not? Maybe zipping past or fighting off trucks and bikes racing towards the drop zone themselves? The final boss fight felt like a swing and a miss to me too, as it doesn't feel like it fits the mechanics of the game. It's a monster fight with glowing weak spots, a monster that will charge directly at you or throw stuff at your face. If we had a sidestep ability or something like that, this would have been more bearable, but as it is, I found myself just double jumping out of the way and waiting for them to bend over to expose their glowing spot. Just like your mom, hey, too in this video. The twins should have been the final fight, with that happening in Prosperity, which itself is another missed opportunity in my opinion. I do like it when we're given a base to build up and improve over the course of a game, but Prosperity barely changes its appearance and almost all of it can be improved through menus wherever you are on the map. So instead of it being some sort of sanctuary you can return to and feel safe in, I found myself dreading going back because it's so far away from everything and I hadn't unlocked fast travel yet. It's not all negativity though, there are some changes made here that I really do like, and my favourite change in this game was the improved buddy system, or whatever they call it. Like in Far Cry 5, we have a range of companions to call upon and help us in a fight, each with different weapons and abilities. In my Far Cry 5 video, I said that I wished these companions could be upgraded in some way, and as it turns out, other people thought so too several years ago, so this is now the case with the 8 companions we have to choose from here, with enough variety to fit anybody's playstyle. They unlock 2 new abilities after reaching different kill counts, which I found pretty easy with most companions, but I did find very difficult to upgrade Horatio, a giant boar which after 15 kills can revive himself, which sounds like a very handy skill. I wouldn't know though because I tended to kill everyone before he managed to get within range. But this upgrade system meant that I generally chose to have someone palling around with me while murdering my way across the county. Some of these guys are unlocked as part of the story, and others you'll have to find on the map and complete a quest for them, just like in Far Cry 5. This is exactly the sort of improvement I wanted to see after playing the last game, and I'm glad they pulled it off here. This is a great system that you can engage with as much or as little as you like. There are a couple of other little changes that they made here which I personally didn't feel was needed. The perk system returns for Far Cry 5, which I am still just as in favour of as I was for that game, but now we have to unlock binoculars for the first time in the series, rather than just being given them. This seems like such an essential tool at this point that I imagine this is likely most people's first unlock, and making it so cheap to do so makes me question the point of making it a purchasable skill in the first place. They also changed the default button for deploying your parachute, which I didn't realise until I first tried to open the thing. Speaking of skills, there's those superpowers I mentioned earlier. You are fed a blessed apple during the storyline, and you unlock a new set of perks to activate. These abilities brought to mind comparisons with two games very different to each other, but both having ties to New Dawn. My first thought was that these are very similar to the Crisis suit abilities. You can make yourself harder to spot, deal more damage, or jump higher. So I wondered if this was some sort of nod to Crytek, creators of the Crisis series and the very first Far Cry game. The powers also reminded me of the suit abilities from Rage 2, connected to this game by basically being the exact same game, just made by different people. It might also be a callback to the powers you were given in the Xbox exclusive Far Cry games, but I'm not sure they'd include a callback to a game that no one has played or remembered, so it's probably not that. All in all though, I didn't use many of the powers that much. I mean, that's a lie, I used the execution one plenty because it just replaces your standard takedown, and while I admit I balked at the idea of a double jump in a Far Cry game, I did end up using it fairly regularly, mainly just to avoid having to climb ladders or to get around more quickly. I did use the one that lets you take and deal more damage in the fight against the twins, but that was about the only time I can remember using it. I mentioned earlier that I was done with drug-induced hallucinations in my Far Cry games, and I don't think swapping them out for superpowers is the way to go moving forward. Personally, I'd much rather see them bring back healing animations, which are once again completely absent in this game. They've also added a relatively slow animation of opening a pill bottle, kind of like in Far Cry 2 when you heal, but this just feels so much slower compared to the very quick injections and medkits of the last few games, and this feels at odds with the fast and frenetic gunplay. Oh, and we actually do get to see our avatar in-game now, rather than just the customization menu screen, which actually gives some purpose to unlocking all those different outfits. When you conquer an outpost, you will see your chap or chapette posing like a boss in their new yard. However, as I was unable to find any clothing which I liked the look of, I instead made it my mission to make him look as much of a prat as possible. Just look at him, thinking he looked so great, just stood there with his hat and his mustache and his shorts, whatever. Which, in a bit less time than usual, is just about all there is for me to say on Far Cry New Dawn. It's a shame I left this game feeling frustrated at it, as I had high hopes going in. I also had a similar feeling when finishing the original game, because the last section of that experience was absolute donkey ass, but the unpleasantness here was spread out across a longer period of time. Even more frustrating is the good that this game does, or at least attempts to do. The buddy system is excellent, and the expeditions and supply drops have so much potential which I feel was wasted here, and I really hope Far Cry 6 builds on and improves these systems. The shooting mechanics are still solid here though, and there's a timelessness to being able to scout out enemy outposts and plan your attack with the range of tools on offer. This is a solid foundation of systems that permeates throughout the series, but for me, the extras and the unique touches that they bolted onto this entry did nothing but drag down the experience and annoy me. Which brings us to my ranking and leaves me with a little bit of a conundrum. This is a list of the Far Cry games in order of my personal preference, which is tricky because, as I said earlier, many of these games are so very different from any of the others, each coming with their own list of strengths and weaknesses. The reason the original Far Cry is currently at the bottom of the list is because, as I said at the start of the video, it is much more comparable to the Crisis series than it is anything else that shares the Far Cry name. So if I were looking to play a Far Cry game, that would be my last choice. Hopefully that makes sense.
Stupid bastard.
But that leaves me with a bit of a pickle when it comes to placing this game on my list. On one hand, I am struggling to remember another game which disappointed and frustrated me so much with its nonsense decisions. They had a solid structure with the series, and they had to fuck around with it for the sake of padding out what was supposed to be 1/3 of a game into an entire standalone release, and some microtransaction bullshit to force repetitive grinding. On the other hand, this is pretty easily identifiable as what we think of as a Far Cry game. It has the outposts, the weapon loadouts, the takedowns, it has the random elements of chaos that create unique encounters for each player, though admittedly quite a bit less than other releases. This is more of a Far Cry game than the original Far Cry, but unlike any other entries in this series so far, I found myself consistently frustrated with poor design decisions. And I think, For that alone, I would rather play through a game that would be a better fit in another series altogether than play through Far Cry New Dawn again. So yeah, bottom spot. I really didn't think it would go this way, but I can't stand these looter shooter systems in my offline single player games. Ugh, I feel all dirty now. I kind of hate it for people to think of me as one of those people that just shits on games all the time, but this one really let me down and I am upset about it. I'm hoping that Far Cry 6 remedies this a bit so we can end the series on a slightly higher note, but I really don't know what to expect from that one. The problem is it's currently the latest Far Cry game, so everybody still hates it, and that won't change until Far Cry 7 comes out, and then the narrative will change and 6 will generally be regarded as a classic. So it's a good job I'm here to set the record straight. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching and good luck with that thing that you've got coming up. Let me know how it went, I know you'll smash it. With the end in sight for this series, I am planning on what I'm going to do once I run out of Far Cry games, and my list of ideas does have a few things on it, but I'm always open for more suggestions, so please feel free to throw some games or entire series at me that you'd want to see a ranking of. Remember that memberships are now live for the channel, so if you want a shout out at the start of every video, you know where to go, and if you want a free shout out, just head back to the quick flashing wall of text at the start of the video and follow the instructions there. If you are still here, please do leave a like, it only seems fair at this point, and don't forget to subscribe like your life depends on it, because it might. I'm not sure how, but I can't say for certain that it won't, so I wouldn't want to take the risk.